Welcome back to the True Sports Physical Therapy Podcast. I am honored to have Molly Binetti with us today, the head strength and conditioning coach for University of South Carolina Gamecocks women's basketball specifically. I had the privilege of hearing Molly talk about some of her training regimens, the way she approaches the basketball athlete. So Molly, welcome aboard. I'm excited to dig in.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me on. No, it's my pleasure, and glad that we got a chance to connect a little bit over the weekend, just briefly, but I'm excited to kind of dive deeper today.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things that you kind of opened your speech with or your talk with at Sportsmith in Pittsburgh was how rarely you use a barbell. And you did a great job of showing one of the world's best women's basketball players trying to do an overhead squat, and it looked piss poor. No offense.
It's
And
awful.
it was awful, and it looked like she had the movement patterns of a secretary versus an elite level athlete. So can you dig into when barbell training kind of fell off the radar for you, why it fell off the radar, and what you replace it with?
Yeah, I don't know that I was ever married to the barbell to begin with. I think a lot of strength coaches are. Um, and I think that's kind of what we're taught is, we've got to be able to objectively measure strength. And we were taught that you either do some sort of back squat or front squat, or maybe it's a trap bar deadlift, right? And then you get their 1RM and you figure out what their strength levels are. And what I've just found with basketball players is when they're really, like, for us at South Carolina, we get really good basketball players in, but when they come to me, they're not great movers. And I would say they're pretty average athletically. And everyone thinks we get these crazy athletes, but we really just get these crazy skilled basketball players. So what I was just finding with our players is that, I think honestly the biggest part of our job is where we have to be problem solvers. And so for me, it's always just been about finding the best solution for each of our athletes to be able to get in the best position, to achieve full ranges of motion. And what I've just found is that a lot of our athletes really struggle getting into full ranges of motion when they're doing something like a squat or a lunge and things of that nature. And so, we've always been taught too, right? We don't want to load dysfunction. So if they can't move well to begin with, I'm not going to load them up with a bar, which, again, basketball players too, like, their anthropometry is crazy. It's not the same as you and I. And so they've got these crazy limb lengths, and just, these different types of bodies that just don't really move well. And then you put a barbell on their back or even in front, and it doesn't help the situation any better. So I think I've just been trying to find ways to load our athletes in better ways that are more advantageous. And then I think as I've gotten into it, I've just realized too that I guess I don't see the purpose in having to use a barbell to load them. I'm not really testing their strength. I found that most of our best basketball players aren't the strongest in terms of how much weight that they're lifting. So if it doesn't really matter that much, then why am I trying to do it? And I always just kind of come back to that.
Yeah, and so, you mentioned measuring strength. So if you're not doing it with a barbell, how do you measure their strength?
I think that I can get everything I need from them jumping on a force plate. Obviously, you can get a force output when they do the counter movement jump. And I've just found that their 1RM or even their 3RM or whatever it is, like, just does not correlate to better basketball play. So while we still train strength, and we know that we need load on the system, I feel like I can best get or measure their strength by how well they're jumping, how those metrics are improving, what their force characteristics look like. And really, at the end of the day, it just comes down to, are they able to use their body better on the court?
Yep.
And for me, that's how I measure it.
Yeah. Okay. And when did you come to that? Because you get to South Carolina, what was the light bulb moment that let you realize, hey, maybe barbell training is not it for me?
Yeah, I think my first year at South Carolina, I really struggled for a lot of reasons, and that's a whole different conversation in itself. But I think my first year I got to South Carolina, I wanted to come in and do things my way. And I had just come from a system that was very much, okay, we need to test, we need to track data, and it's very systematic. And, like, these are the things that matter most, and, like, this is how things should be done. And so I kind of came into this new environment thinking, okay, this is how we're going to do things. And while our athletes got stronger, they jumped better, all of their metrics were improving, it didn't equate to better outputs on the court. And our athletes were really resistant to some of the things that we were doing. I was almost trying to force a square peg into a round hole. It just didn't all make sense. And I was trying so hard to do it a certain way. And it just, at the end of the day, I just had to rethink sort of everything. That whole year made me really rethink my approach to coaching in general, in every layer of what coaching means. And so after that year, we kind of had a new wave of players come in. Our entire team dynamic was different, and just how I approached training in general became more of a partnership rather than a dictatorship. And it was more so meeting the athlete where they were and then letting them have some say in what we were doing too, and letting them pick some different exercises. So like, for example, if we're squatting, I might have 6 or 7 different variations going on, just based on what the athlete prefers, and 2, what makes the most sense for them from a movement standpoint too. And so I just became a lot more open-minded about things. And that was kind of where it originated. And then just as I've gotten into it, you just figure out kind of what matters the most. And it's really not about what we do, because the way that we do things can be a multitude of different ways and still come up with a good result. But I think it really just came down to figuring out what mattered most. And at the end of the day, the risk to reward ratio, I didn't find the value in it the way that I once did.
Yeah. And so what kind of metrics started to move for you once you moved away from your more standard strength and conditioning?
One, I think honestly, the biggest one is enjoyment and like buy into what we were doing in the weight room. And it actually being something that they felt like they were a part of. Like when you give somebody a little bit of say and you're making adjustments and individualizations based on that athlete and their bodies and what feels good and what looks good and all those things, like you just get a much higher degree of engagement. So a lot of these things that I'm looking at too are very subjective. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned, is that what we do is not black and white. And we've got to like lean into that subjective aspect of coaching too. So that, and then obviously their movement quality, like I always prided myself, like I was able to teach movement well the way that we were training before too, but just like the way that they move their bodies and their athleticism and things like that, I saw improve in the weight room. And then I also saw that translate to how they're moving on the court as well too. And I guess that's kind of what I measured up against. And again, there's a little bit of subjectivity to it, but the game has to be the metric. And if what you're doing is not moving the needle in that context, then it really doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay. So you hit on the point that you're super individualized. You give the athlete some options when they walk into the weight room. Is something like that scalable to a roster of 50 people, of 90 people? Like as you start thinking about football, like how would you manage that?
I really think that it is, that's a lot of the feedback I get sometimes when I talk to coaches that work with either, a team that is larger in size like football, or they work with multiple teams, right? It's how do we individualize things? And I think sometimes people think that individualization means like every single person has got something completely different. And I think individualization can be something as simple as, okay, if you are squatting, here are some different levels to that. Maybe this person's goblet squatting. Maybe this person is split squat, maybe this, whatever that might be. Like there are so many different exercises that you can choose to accomplish the same thing. And I think part of that process for me in the education is like, I want to introduce my athletes to a variety of options, like early on in their training. Like I want them to be exposed to multiple types of squats and lunges and things like that. And then along that way, we're talking about, okay, like, does this one feel good? Like, how do you like this? And we're getting feedback from one another and learning like what they like and what looks good for that person. Again, it's just like solving a puzzle. You're trying to figure out, it's trial and error. And so I think for a big team like football, it's as simple as that. It's okay. Like, this is what we've got for the day.
Yeah. Here are your options.
And then, here are your options. Like I don't care. Like, I'll do this for our athletes too, like in season, like, okay, like this is a heavy day for us lower body wise. Like we're going to squat, or maybe it's a hinge pattern, deadlift pattern, whatever it might be. And then like, okay, you can choose like whatever exercise you want to go at, and understanding like, this is one we're going to go hard at today. Okay. Pick what you want to do. I don't care. It's accomplishing the same mission. So it can be as simple as that.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. I saw this idea of strength training from a menu of options from Schlesinger. He was with Stanford and then he was with the Suns, right? And so he really opened my eyes to the concept of heel floating and what it does to Achilles
Yep.
tendinopathy because it's so common. So that was the first time I've seen it. Have you seen any other experts dive into this menu world?
Yeah, Corey's definitely one too, and his counterpart down at Texas, Zach Zillner on the women's side. He's somebody that I feel like is very like-minded. Um, and I don't even know necessarily who I kind of got the concept from initially, but I think I've talked with some other people like Travis Knight at Gonzaga is one that is really kind of non-traditional in his approach to his training. Allie Kirshner, who used to be at Stanford on the women's side. There's been kind of a group of people over the years that we kind of have thought very like-minded in terms of like providing autonomy and the importance of that in the weight room, just in terms of creating that engagement and that buy-in. And then also too, it just kind of makes sense when you think about the wide range of body types that you have. Like, why does everybody have to do the same thing?
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I mean, how did you take it all the way to the level? Because this is what struck me from your presentation at Sportsmith was within a given set, reps are different. So can you speak on where that came from and how that actually plays out in the weight room?
Yeah, I learned a lot about this from Travis Knight at Gonzaga. He works with men's basketball there, and um, I've researched a lot on just this concept of kind of differential learning and just teaching. I would say Sean Mishka is a guy too. He's more on the movement side of things, and just like the concepts of Franz Bosch too. Like, it's all about skill acquisition and teaching movement and motor learning and all these concepts. So like, we don't move in just one way. Like, there's no one right technique. There's no one right movement pattern. Like, and then you take sport, which is inherently super chaotic. So like, while I understand the roots of strength and conditioning, and like, yes, we've got to at a fundamental level train our body and our muscles, our tissues, or all of that to just be robust. And like, sometimes that just means like, okay, we're going to do a bilateral strength movement. But then like, outside of that very small percentage, like, how are we actually teaching our athletes to move better? So it's really just like this approach of, why are we teaching our athletes to be super robotic in the weight room when they're about to go out on the court, which is super unsafe, super chaotic, and all of these things. And then how can we, at the end of the day, like, the best athletes and the best movers are the ones that can solve movement problems the fastest. They can figure out what they need to do in a given situation, make the decision, and then get their bodies to do it. So when I thought about what matters most and how do I increase transferability from the weight room to the court the most, it always came back to this question, like, how can I impact skill better? Like, I want them to be more skilled. And like, that's the main thing. So I just started playing around and experimenting with these concepts, and like, our athletes love it. It gives them a chance to one, have fun, kind of be creative. Like, I try to be as hands off as possible and just kind of let them explore different things. And it's just been something that there's been a really good response to. And like, the more I learn about it, and I would say like, I'm still, when it comes to understanding all of the concepts, like, it's very dumbed down for me, but just that small change alone, I think, goes a long way in teaching our athletes to be better movers.
Yeah, now it's awesome in your setting, but how would you relate those concepts to the rehab process, right? Because you're talking to a bunch of sports PTs now on this pod. I'm sure you have interaction with PTs at South Carolina. So how would you say that concept works in the rehab atmosphere?
Yeah, to me, I view it the same way. I think it's Charlie Weingroff says, rehab is training, training is rehab. Like, it all should look very similar. And I think, actually at South Carolina, like, myself and our athletic trainer, we do all of our rehabs in house. Fortunately, we haven't had to do too many, knock on wood. But, and this is something I've learned too because we're doing things in house. I have physical therapists that I go to. Julie Ebensteiner is one. She's up in Minnesota, and I've learned a ton from her implementing these kind of concepts in the rehab setting as well too. And I think it's maybe a new school approach to rehab, but I think it's super important that you expose from a motor learning standpoint and just training the brain. I think sometimes we think so, like we have this tunnel vision of like we're training a certain area or location, and then we're training a muscle, or we're training whatever, even just something as simple as we're training a movement pattern. But we get so tunnel vision that we're not thinking about other ways that we can be exposing their tissues and their brains to connect the dots. Because I think at the end of the day, that's the hardest part, is retraining the brain after injury. So how can we give the brain better inputs that's going to help long term get this athlete back to moving like an athlete faster? And so we incorporate this in every aspect, from whether it's rehab, and then obviously there's certain things with rehabs in terms of reintroducing movements. Like we do a little bit more closed drill, for lack of a better term, just like very rudimentary movement patterns, obviously just to re-expose them. But even within that, we're changing things up constantly.
Okay, so let's dive a little bit more into that. So you have someone coming out of, let's say, an ACL, right, where they pull out the middle third of their patellar tendon and they use that as their ACL, so they have a standard BTB. Is there any fear that when you give them flexibility to play with their own angles, to put weight where maybe they feel it, or at least it's varied, that they're going to find ways to circumvent the injured tissue, which is the opposite of what we want to do?
Yeah. I think, again, I kind of view it as a puzzle. Like everything's a little bit of a guessing game, right? And like, you've got to kind of have this like keen awareness of watching them do it. Like I think there's different constraints that you can give, especially early on in the rehab process, of like, you want to make it obviously as safe as possible for that athlete while still challenging that system. So I think it comes down to a little bit of trial and error, and then also a little bit of just like, okay, what constraints can I place that's going to make this athlete do it the right way, or figure it out the right way? And that's where the challenge is. And there's no black and white answer to it, but that's how I think we tackle it. How do I make this as easy as possible for this athlete to not compensate and do this a different way than what we want? And so trying to think of a really easy example of this. I don't know that I have.
Would say I would say like if you're doing a Bulgarian split squat, right? And you're loading up that compromised patellar tendon, the athlete is naturally going to shift towards more of a hip dominant strategy, right, than a knee dominant strategy. And so my fear is, and you can speak to this, if there's no right way to do that exercise, it's just accomplish this movement, then how do you coach it?
Yep. So I think in that situation, what I would do is place either a cone, or I'd have some sort of visual constraint to where their foot placement should be. Or I would give a target. I know what I've done in the past to get them loading forward or more anteriorly into that knee is giving them a target kind of past their foot that they've got to reach and touch, and constantly striving for that, getting them comfortable loading into that knee. Because you're exactly right. You're going to see that more hip dominant pattern. I don't want a vertical shin. I want that knee going past their toes or forward towards that direction as much as possible. So I think in that type of exercise to start, it would be, okay, this is where I want your foot placed. And then let's see what this looks like. And then like, if I see you can achieve that, okay, then we can get a little bit more. Let's play around with some different foot positions, distances, and things like that.
True Sports Physical Therapy is growing like wildfire. We have 14 locations, soon to be more. We are throughout the state of Maryland. We're in Pennsylvania, in Lebanon and York, Pennsylvania, as well as in Delaware, in Newark and Wilmington, Delaware. Like I said, so many more practices to come, and we always need outstanding sports physical therapists. Our treatment style is unique. We are one-on-one with your athlete for 45 minutes every single session. You do the entire treatment. You do the entire evaluation, and they are in state-of-the-art facilities where you have room to run, throw, and jump, and really get your athlete all the way back to on the field and better and stronger than they were. We also have outstanding salaries, comp structures, bonus abilities, 401ks, as well as a very strong continuing education offering, including in-house continuing education. And we're looking for you. Now is the time, as we are growing like crazy. Just shoot your resume over to Yoni, Y-O-N-I, at True Sports PT, or shoot us a DM and we will hit you back. We will get you in for our unique, tried and true interview process and really make a determination that this is the right place for you to grow your career and get your athletes better than ever. We can't wait to hear from you. Okay, that's super interesting. You mentioned something in your talk about trying to get these athletes to move within rhythm and find certain paces. How do you do that? What does that look like in the weight room?
Yeah, I think it starts as simple as we do a lot of skipping, pogos, various locomotion patterns on our turf. And so just introducing them to a variety of different low-level skills like that and just seeing what they look like. So we'll start with some different really small quick skips. We'll do different pogo patterns. So just some really low intensity, like forward pogos, backwards, sideways, diagonal, all these different things. Within that, we can change like how many foot contacts and like a little bit different rhythmic patterns within those things. Teaching them, just more like locomotive skills that we don't think about, like learning how to gallop and what that rhythm of a gallop is compared to like a skip. And just throwing a bunch of things at them and just seeing how they move. And so we kind of add that into every training session. And those are some of the first things that I do, like with rehabs as well too. Like we had a freshman early enroll this past December who came to us, had to have knee surgery and chose to come to us to do that and then rehab with us too. Like before we are even talking about running or running mechanics, and even before she's able to like really have full ranges of motion bending, I'm teaching how to do these rhythmic movements and more tissue specific loading. And they're able to do it a lot quicker than we think we might able to. We might think we have to be super stationary and like, oh no, we need to get squat range of motion and split squat and all these things. But like, if you introduce them to these things right away, they're actually able to do it and train their brain to like re-coordinate itself. And it's been super powerful in getting our athletes back quicker. And it actually impacts their movement quality when it comes to some of those other movements, rather than like getting good at a squat and getting good at a lunge doesn't get you better at those things, but those things actually help you move better in more stationary ways. So that's one way we do it. And then even just like different tempos with like squatting movements, lunge movements, like dropping in and out of a squat or in and out of a lunge, and then like adding different pogo variations within those things too, and just getting them to like kind of think quick and figure out how to adjust their body to those rhythms. So those are just a few small examples.
I think those are really good examples. I think I'm seeing it now. I'm working with an NFL guy coming out of Achilles tendon repair, and we got to a certain point and the guy still could not do a single leg heel raise. And having consulted with some of the sports scientists in the NFL, really candidly saying, hey, what did I miss? Their answer was, let's just get him back to football activities. Now that we know the tissue is healed, now that we know it's safe, once we get back into those known environments, things are going to start clicking. And it really did, right? And so that's kind of what you're describing, is getting them more, like exposing the neural system or the nervous system. How impactful that can be. I think that was a real learning moment for me. Tell me how you apply periodization when you're so seemingly random, although I know there is a thought process behind it. What does periodization look like over the season?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I had someone ask me that actually after my talk, and the reality of it is I wouldn't say I follow a specific periodization model, because the reality of
Molly,
it is,
that's crazy.
I know. The reality of working in collegiate team sports is that there are 8 million variables that you are fighting against on any given day. And so for me, I literally take it day by day. And when I don't mean I just make up workouts as I go day by day, but honestly, as I've gone, the more I do that because things are always fluctuating. But what doesn't change is I know in a given time frame, whatever part of the year it is, whether it's early off season, late off season, preseason, in season, I know what qualities I'm trying to target. Like those things never go away, but like how you get there has to be really flexible. I used to write out 4-week programs and then I'd, have multiple blocks of 4 weeks that lay out my entire year. And then I was like, why the hell am I doing this? Because I've never even written a 4-week program that has stayed the same. It's like it's constantly like moving things around and figuring out puzzle pieces. And so I've really just gotten like, if you're clear on your principles, clear on what you want to achieve, what that looks like on a day-to-day basis can change. And that is where you have that flexibility to like, there's a lot of room for input from the athlete. Like I know ideally like what total volume I want to be around, whether, depending on what quality I'm trying to target, but like how we get there changes and like the means that we use to get there change all the time. So I think that is something that's changed a lot for me. And like when you can relinquish that control a little bit as a coach, because like as coaches, we inherently crave control. Everything goes a lot smoother and you realize that like what you choose to do doesn't matter as much as just making sure that you're moving in the direction that you want to go to.
Yeah, those are interesting points. That lands for me in the sports rehab setting. We use electronic medical records, right? And so part of it is you want to opt into the flow chart option. And since we've been in existence since 2014, we don't use the flow chart because every time that athlete walks in, we're doing something completely different. So it doesn't help me to pull forward, right, from our last workout. It's based upon what they tell me that day, depending upon what our goals are, and we will play with the variables in there. So it sounds very similar.
Yes. And it might be like, I'd say I like to work with ranges a lot. So whether it's rep ranges or it's kind of load ranges, I can't tell you the last time I actually prescribe somebody a load. It's more so it should feel like this. I try to keep it as simple as possible for our players. Maybe we use a 1 to 10 scale. Like it should feel like this. And what that is on a given day changes. Like what might feel like a 6 one day, maybe they're lifting 135 pounds or something. The next day, a 6 could feel like lifting 50 pounds, whatever. Like it constantly changes. So I think just based on like, again, you have your target, you have the range that's still going to keep you in that target. Okay, let's figure out how we work with that. I like to give options. Like, okay, this is option A. If you feel great, this is what you got today. Option B is this modification. Option C is maybe you just need a recovery day. Like, oh, you haven't been sleeping. Like you just broke up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever's going on, like giving them room to adjust, like still doing something that moves the needle in some way. So I think, again, it just kind of comes back to like, I think adaptability is the most important quality in a successful strength coach, like in the team sports setting, because nothing goes as planned. You could spend so much time writing out the perfect training program, and I guarantee you after maybe the first week, like it's completely different than what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Okay, so a freshman walks onto South Carolina campus. They're meeting Molly Binetti for the first time. What does that assessment look like for you?
Yeah, honestly, the first thing we do is like I just have them in my office and we just have a conversation. I think the most important piece is knowing our athletes. And for me, like I spend more time with them than anybody else on our staff because I get the most time with them, and I'm at everything. And our coaches know that if they're not where they need to be physically, like they're not going to do well out on the court. So what that looks like is I'm just asking them a lot of questions. From a training standpoint, I'm asking them about their experiences in the past, things that they like, things that they don't like, or things that they feel like help them or don't help them. Asking them like, what is it that you really want to accomplish here? And like getting really clear on where they want to go and the things that they want to do. And then like building that partnership with them of like, okay, like I'm here to get you to that point. Like, this is what this is going to look like. We're going to figure it out together. but I just want to talk with them. I want to get as much information as I can. And then from an assessment standpoint, I'm going to take them through kind of a battery of just some really basic movement patterns. Like I just want to, it's nothing formal. Like there's no formal assessment other than I'm going to take you, I want you to do a squat. Show me if you can do a lunge or a split squat. Can you do a push-up? Can you do a drop off a box and just land? Or can you land on one leg or like a drop into a single leg landing position on one leg, not off a box or anything? And then I'm going to take them through a battery of jump tests and just both subjectively and objectively look at their jumps. So obviously I'm tracking metrics on those, but I also just want to watch them and how they load, how they take off. Do I notice anything, right to left, and just kind of make note of the things that I see, just watching them move in kind of these various positions and then jump and land in these different tests.
And what are you measuring aside from quality?
Yeah, so we do a counter movement jump with hands on hips on our force plates. I always say the handful of metrics that I really care about, I look at their eccentric rate of force development. I look at their jump height based on their impulse, and I look at their concentric impulse. Look at their RSI mod, so basically how high they jump and how fast they jump. So basically how efficient is their stretch shortening cycle. And then I will look at their peak power per body weight. So what's their relative power and how does that change as their body weight changes as well too. I would say that's one that we do most often. We jump them a few times a week on the force plates throughout the year. And then I do a battery of tests on our jump mat just to look at a couple different things that are a little bit more simple. Like the force plates are awesome, but you can get so far into the weeds. So when we got them, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible so I could learn it the best, but also keep it really simple for our athletes too to learn.
Yeah.
And then on the jump mat, we do a repeat test. So I want to look at how quickly they can get off the ground, their ground contact times, both on two legs and on one leg. And then we do a strict just jump off one leg as high as you can and then come down and land on two. And I look at the difference in that right to left side. So I look at loading strategy. And then obviously I look at, from a metrics standpoint, I'm just looking at jump height and what percent difference is there. We know there's going to be some, but like, is it huge or is it within what we would consider normal?
Okay. And why use the jump mat for those instead of just keeping all of that on force plates?
From a simplicity standpoint, like you can get a million metrics. And like when we first got those force plates in, I just wanted to learn one jump and like really learn the ins and out of the counter movement jump. I could do it on there, but from a time standpoint, the jump mat is super quick and it just gives me really simple information. And that was also something that I'd been doing prior to getting the force plates. We just got force plates like 2 years ago. So I wanted to keep that in there from a consistency standpoint rather than go everything to the force plates, which I may do at some point, but to me, it's just a little bit simpler.
And are you using Vault plates?
Yeah, we use Force-X.
Okay, so what was the hardest thing for you to integrate the Force-X into what you do every day?
I think sometimes it takes a little bit. Like I had to be okay with kind of it interrupting the flow of stuff. And I think some people like get really like they want everything to be consistent. Like, oh no, we have to jump after doing this protocol and like at this time of the lift. And like for me, it was just like, no, like we're going to jump at any point during the workout. Like I'm not keeping it consistent. Like I know everyone said like if I were doing research or something like that, like I would probably care a lot more. But I think the reality of training is like it's not going to be the same every time and it's not going to be perfect. So I think just getting our athletes used to it and used to jumping with hands on their hips, which is a very unnatural skill for them. So there's a little bit of a period of getting used to just that motion. So like a lot of our athletes, what I see too, when they jump, they look super uncoordinated, but they've just never been asked to jump in that sort of setting before. So just like getting them comfortable in that setting. And then sometimes it just takes a little bit to like get the plates going and like pull the next person up. So it's just like, technology is hit or miss. Like sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. But, and then just getting them, they're like, why are we doing this? And explaining to them, even, a year down the line, they'll still be like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so based upon those battery of tests, how does that color your intervention for each athlete?
Yeah, so I think within those tests, I can get a pretty good idea of one, how they load. So what is their loading strategy like? Are they, you look at your springiest athletes, usually they're the ones that are hardly bending their knees, but they lean forward at the waist and they're super tendon driven, so they can get off the ground quick, but there's not a ton of knee bend. You can tell like right off the bat, is this kid really strong? Like I guess divide them into a quadrant system. Like, are they a high jumper? Like, do they jump high? And then within that, like, do they jump high and jump high? Or excuse me, do they jump high and jump fast? Do they jump high, but it's pretty slow? So are they more force driven? It takes them longer to get off the ground. Um, do they like jump not very high and jump fast? And then like, are they slow and they don't jump fast? So
Yeah.
like you can kind of break them into those four areas there and get an idea of like, okay, like what's the lowest hanging fruit? Like, is this kid pretty strong? They look strong. We just need to work on being more explosive, quicker off the ground, and more elastic qualities. Or is this kid already super elastic, which we don't want to change? So we don't want to just completely drive strength in that kid. But okay, like we want to keep those qualities high, and then but we probably need to push a little bit of strength in certain areas. So just kind of profiling them and figuring out what qualities they're really good at, what qualities they're maybe not so great at. And
And then
then
do they get different workouts based upon what bucket they fall into?
yeah, a little bit. So it'll change kind of what I'm programming for them in terms of their like speed and power development. So like if this is a kid that really needs to work on elasticity and reactivity, their exercise, I might be working on more like repeat jumps or like some more short coupling times in terms of exercise selection versus somebody who doesn't need that. Is going to be maybe a little bit slower, more force driven, a little bit maybe more loaded jumps and things of that nature. So again, it kind of falls within the same construct of the workout. The workout structure might look the same, but we're just changing out exercises and emphasis on the exercises that we're choosing.
And so what do? You put this on a whiteboard when the athlete walks in the gym?
Yeah, sometimes I use the TVs. During the season, I would say this season was different because our team dynamic was so different. But like in season, each person kind of has their own sheet, like based on the day. But I got away from doing like, you see a lot in college team sports, like you're going to get your program. It's like your 4-day workouts laid out for the next 4 weeks. Like I will write it up on the whiteboard, or I might have multiple workouts on the whiteboard, or I might have multiple workouts up on the TV. But a lot of times I use the whiteboard, and I know that might be old school, but like I think more coaches that I've talked to that are kind of in the same kind of like-minded, especially in basketball, like it is kind of a day-by-day process. And then we're like just changing things out, or like I have the athlete come help me like create their workout, like based on, again, just the guidelines and the constraints for the day. And then like I keep records of things, like every kid's got notes and like preferences and all these different things. And I'm obviously keeping track of like overall overarching like program basics for each time of the year, but like what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is kind of decided on that day.
On that day. And how do you measure overall load?
I don't know that I do.
Well, I mean, if they had a strenuous practice, right? They
Yeah,
come in.
yeah.
How do you know how strenuous that practice was? Maybe it wasn't that strenuous, and they're just perceiving it as such. How do you put those variables together?
Well, I will say we use Connexon for practice and games. So we do have a load monitoring device on them. And then, and I'm at every practice, so I also know exactly what's happening and kind of what is normal for us. But I think like one of the most underemphasized and just like overlooked aspects of it too is just like having conversations with your players. And like, yes, sometimes they're dramatic, but for the most part, like our kids they don't really bullshit in that regard. Like they're going to tell you how they're feeling. And like, even if it wasn't that hard of a practice, but they perceive it to be a super, super hard practice. Like, okay, I've got to take that into consideration. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, just stop being soft. Like, no, like, okay, one, why is it so hard? Like what's underlying? Is it lifestyle habits? Most of the time it is.
Yeah.
But then, just making small modifications, or I'm just like, listen, like, do you think you can do this? Like, how do you, like, you got to just be straight up with me. Like, I'm not, and I think I've gotten to the point where, like, I'm not going to make a kid do anything. I'm just not at that point anymore.
Yeah.
Just like figuring out what battles you're going to fight. So, but most of the time I get them before practice, so I don't even really have to worry about it.
Hey guys, quick pause and a quick shout out to this new masterclass that we just launched here at True Sports Physical Therapy. Myself and Dr. Tim Stone put together a masterclass of ACL rehab, and we call it From Table to Turf. And the reason we call it that is because it's going to teach you exactly how to get your athlete all the way from post-op day one with the nitty-gritty of regaining all of that range of motion, with the tips and the tricks that we use here at True Sports Physical Therapy that gets our athletes better, faster, and stronger. And that's early. And then how do you progress that athlete all the way onto the field with a ball in their foot or a stick in their hand or whatever their sport is, and teach them how to accelerate, how to decel, how to change direction, all the mechanics that go in there. What drills do we use to get our athletes exactly where they need to be, back on the field, and even better than before injury? And I want you to sign up for that class. Now, you can find it on our website. You can shoot us a direct message and just say, hey, send me the course. It's right now on sale, so make sure you sign up now. It is fully accredited to get you all of your continuing education hours. Sign up for the True Sports Masterclass ACL, From Table to Turf. Thanks, guys. Yeah, okay, so that's great.
Yeah.
Then you put up a crazy stat of games missed per year, right? Can you share that stat, and what do you think the biggest factor in that statistic was?
Yeah, I think, like, we've missed 54 games out of, I want to say it's 2,690 opportunities. Some give or take a few there, which really is a crazy statistic if you think about it.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. And like 36 of those 54 were from one kid. 6 of them so she tore ACL as a freshman, her second game of the year. Like, and she was a train wreck coming in. I remember saying to people, I'm like, I would, like, if anybody on our team is going to get hurt, it's this girl right here. And sure enough, but it was also the best thing to happen to her. That's besides the point. But and then 6, we had a senior. She tore her Achilles in our SEC championship game, so she missed the last 6 games of our postseason. And then from there, honestly, the other, how many is that? We got 36, 40. So the other 12 games were all kids that could have played, but it was more so we're going to keep them out for a game or maybe 2 because this has been bugging them and it's more precautionary. But, like, it's really insane. And it really comes down to, one, I have an incredible athletic trainer who really gets it. Like, I think that makes or breaks an athlete's experience from a health standpoint, is that we work really well together.
I mean, you say that like I know you're happy about it, but that's far from a given. So how did you create that?
Yeah, part of it's luck. Like, my very first, so we've been together now. This will be our 6th season together. My first year, we had a different athletic trainer who was very great lady, but very old school, by the book, like not thinking outside the box at all. And then Craig came in my second year, and just his background, and he worked at UVA, and one of the strength coaches there, Mike Curtis, is just one of, like, the most brilliant guys ever, like, in terms of how he prepares his players. He just had a really unique background and just, like, wasn't like, oh no, like, this is how we do things, I'm by the book. It's like always willing to, like, and sees movement, and, like, his job as a rehab specialist to, like, he just sees it more like I do, as opposed to, like, very isolated rehab focus, if that makes sense, or, like, very isolated, like, I tape ankles, like, I deal with all of that. So, like, I just, like, honestly, it lucked out that we had, like, mutual people and friends, and, like, he got here, and it's just, like, this perfect blend right off the bat, and, like, it's very rare. So, like, it just happened to kind of work out that way. But it really, like, when you look at that stat, and, like, I said it in my presentation, like, development is everybody's responsibility, and it does not work. Like, you don't have that track record and you don't win that many games consistently if everybody in on staff is not doing their jobs at the highest level possible. So it's like the willingness to be open-minded, make adjustments. Like Coach Staley is also a coach that gets it. Like she's not somebody that's like, we're going to practice for 3 hours every day and we're going to run them into the ground. Like she's a very intuitive. She is willing to adjust. Like she knows when to push and when to pull and like all of these things. And it's just like this perfect blend of kind of everybody doing their job at a really high level, and communicating like on a daily basis of like where each players are and just like making decisions day by day, like based on what's best for our players. And it sounds simple, like it's not that simple, but I think like when you, like we really haven't been a program that relies on data. Like we use Connexon and things like that. The most time we've ever used it in terms of like prescribing anything is in the case of the girl that tore her ACL and her return to play process. Besides that, like everything that we see lines up with what we would want it to be. But it's based on like my theory is I'm going to let Coach Staley do her job. And like whatever they have to do on the court is the most important thing. And then whatever happens, we will figure out how to adjust on the back end and make sure that our players are ready to go for the next practice. So it just has to be, it's like this really unique blend of just everybody willing to collaborate, communicate, adjust, and just be open to it all.
Okay. I mean, that's amazing. And I'm sure that comes from top down. So tell a little bit different of a topic or path here. How the hell did you get this job? Because it didn't seem like, and I don't say that based on anything we've talked about, because that's obvious how you got this job, but how do you get the interview? How do you nail the interview? What was did you have high-level basketball experience behind this?
Yeah. So good question. I guess, when it comes down to any job I've gotten, and I think in this field in particular, like obviously the quality of your relationships really matters. So I was fortunate enough back when I was in grad school. I remember I was at Minnesota. I drove down to a conference at the University of Kansas. Andrea Hootie, who's a big name in the performance field, she would host a conference every year. I didn't know a single soul. And I was actually in the interview process for a job at Purdue. But I remember I went down there not knowing anybody, and I came away with like 3 key people that have really helped me get every job that I've had. And so I actually ended up meeting a woman down there who was at Maryland at the time. Yeah, Katie Fowler. So Katie Fowler was the strength coach for the women's team at Maryland, and then she would go on to be the strength coach at South Carolina. And she was stepping away, and she actually called me like I was at University of Louisville at the time, assisting with basketball, and then I had a few other teams. I was always involved with basketball in some capacity. Like I played it my whole life. I was always, I had multiple sports, but I always knew like basketball was kind of the route I wanted to explore at one time. But she called me and she was like, "Hey, I'm leaving. Like I can get you an interview if you're interested." And I was actually like, "No, like I'm in a good spot. I had just gotten a raise. Like I was kind of changing my responsibilities a little bit. I'm like, no, I'm good." And she ended up staying for another year. And she called me again the next year and was like, "Hey, listen, like, no, I'm leaving for good. Like your phone's about to ring. Like be ready for a call from Coach Staley." And so sure enough, like that night I got a call from our associate head coach and then talked with Coach Staley that night. And I went through this interview process, and it's actually funny because it was me and this other guy that were up for the job. And she actually offered it to the other guy first. And then kind of a series of events happened and ended up rescinding the offer, and then called me not too long after and offered me the job. And I played hard to get for like half a day, but I called her back pretty quickly. And I was like, yeah, like they were, a year removed from their first national championship, and it was a no-brainer. So it was funny. I remember being on the phone with her, and she was like, we're gonna win a national championship together. And I was like, oh, okay, bet.
I'm in.
Yeah, here we are 6-7 years later, and we've won a couple and done a lot more in between then.
That's amazing. What's your best advice to someone looking to grow in the strength and conditioning world?
Yeah, one piece of advice that I got really early on was, we hear a lot about networking, and it's about who you know. And I think sometimes a mistake we make, especially when we're young, is like we're just trying to get to know as many people as possible, or like connect with as many people as possible. And it's like we almost try to connect and there's no like real substance behind it. It's just like, hey, like a quick intro or whatever it is. But I think that networking is more about less about how many people you have in your network, but more about the quality of relationships with those people. And I think as a young coach, you want to find who is it that is in the position that you want to be in, like who is doing their job really well, or like who's up there that you're like, man, like that's where I want to be, and like seek out that person and build a relationship with them. But like the key to that is you've got to bring value to it too. You can't just try to reach out and then you're just trying to like pour in as much as you can from them. Like you've got to like create this relationship with them, because you can learn. Like I think that's the best way is people, like you learn through experience, and people that are in those positions have a lot of experience and kind of wisdom to share, because we've made a lot of mistakes and we've learned a lot what we wouldn't do, or like what would we do differently, and we can help those people kind of navigate. And then also ultimately when it comes down to when jobs open up, like we're going to have those few people that we rely on to help us, like I get calls all the time, like, hey, I'm trying to fill this job. Like, do you have anybody? And like, I want to be able to say like, yeah, like I've got this person I know because we've spent time, like they're eager to learn all of it. So it really comes down to like, you've got to seek out and not be afraid to like reach out to the people that are in positions above yours that you want to be in. And then like really put forth the time and the effort to learn from them. Go spend some time with them, like create like a consistent communication schedule and things like that. So just
how do you bring value? Like in the Fowler example, how do you bring value to someone who's already reached the mountaintop?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it too, like if you show a willingness of just like when you're asking questions, like to me, that's value. Like there's some people that reach out and like they just want stuff from you, right? And it's not even like they're asking questions, like they just want you to give them information, or like tell me you do, or like what you do, or like tell me, like give me your plan for this. Like that to me is not going about it the right way. I think like organically you create value by like the type of person that you are. So like, are you the person that's just constantly reaching out because you're wanting something from me, or like, are you reaching out because you're just trying to like build a relationship? And I think there's a difference there. If that makes sense, because yeah, like if you're like an intern or whatever it is, like you might not think that you're bringing value, but like if you're consistent, you ask really good questions and like you show that kind of desire to like truly understand and like get to know, and like you make the effort to like come spend time or whatever it is. I think that's a separating factor from the person who's just, you can tell, trying to be able to name drop you in a conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. What kind of, because your talk was so different than some of the other geniuses on stage at Sportsmith, what kind of pushback did you get, if any?
I haven't gotten any pushback to my face, at least. So I mean, I guess that's good. I think at first I had a little bit of imposter syndrome, to be honest, because I'm looking at this lineup and I'm looking at, these people who are a lot more academic, a lot more technical, a lot more research based. But then I also viewed that I'm like, that's my superpower, is that I'm bringing something a lot more practical, and just a different kind of spin on everything that people have been talking about all weekend. And so like I had to get over that initially. I was like, damn, like all these people are smarter than me. And then I was like, wait a second, like how are we measuring intelligence here?
Right.
And so I think I've also just gotten more comfortable in my own skin of like, this is like what I truly believe in. And like, I'm okay if people don't agree with that, but I've also found what really works. And at the end of the day, like the results speak for themselves, and I can't like attribute that to just me. Like that's not a byproduct of me. That's a byproduct of like all of us in our environment and how we work together. But I think like just like owning that it's a little bit different perspective, but I was actually I'm not surprised, but I was pleased with how many people like waited to talk with me afterwards. And also we're just like, that was like the perfect way to kind of bring this all together. And like, that was kind of what I needed to hear. And I'm glad like you said X, Y, and Z. And so that to me, it's always like, if there's even one person in the room that's benefiting from it, and I've done my job. But I was really pleased with the feedback.
Well, I think you were far more real world and clinical application. That's why I reach out to you to get you on the pod, because that's the world we live in, where you have this textbook and academic physical therapy world, and you get out into the real world and you're like, how the hell, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or that's not applicable. And I think you really spoke to the applications of your sport and applied the principles of strength and conditioning. So I thought that was great. That's what I love so much about your talk. I wish you would have, like, your stats at the beginning are mind-numbing. They're unbelievable, like billions of national championships, no games missed, all this stuff. I wanted to see more videos, like from your phone. You're like, oh, I have videos from a year ago. Like, I wish you would have just spent the whole time showing me the myriad of inventions you have, right?
Yeah, I know. And I was like, I was torn. Sorry, I have my dogs. Best guard dogs in the world here. But I was like torn. I'm like figuring out like what to put in, because 40 minutes is such a short amount of time.
Yep.
But like I really do, like my Google Photos library, like I have probably thousands.
We'll send them.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I do. I really am an open book. Like I was having a hard time too, because I was like trying to sort through them all. And then, okay, guys, stop barking. I know.
Cool. There we go.
He's literally barking at the air back there. Yeah, I've got plenty of videos, and I was having some of them I couldn't include too, because like the formatting was weird and it was giving me like, it wasn't playing back on the PowerPoints, right? So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to give like some very small snippets, and if people want more afterwards, like I'm happy to share. But like especially like from I have a ton of videos from like the rehabs that we've had too, and I think I'm doing a presentation. Yeah, I'm doing a presentation next month at the Elite Basketball Rehab Conference in Vegas. It's a bunch of NBA PTs, and I'm going to include, like, that's the kind of topic of my presentation. There is more of the reconditioning side of things, but I'm happy to share, and you know, whatever it is that you want more of, I'm happy to share. I'm an open book. There are no secrets.
That would be super interesting. One more piece about the Sportsman Conference. We heard from Alex Natera, who's the isometric king, right? So when he's talking about isometrics and he's talking about its value, both in the rehab and performance side, did you take anything away from that, which is very academic, very structured? Do you plan on imparting any of that knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. Isometrics are a huge part of what we do already. And I'm always, trying to find ways to change things up a little bit. And admittedly, I didn't catch all of his presentation, but I have his course that I bought on Sportsmith too last year, and I've kind of been working through that. But the way that we include isometrics all the time, like our off season, like isometric, kind of like I said, like eccentric and isometric loading means are probably 75% of what we do.
That sounds very periodized, Molly.
If I had to put a number on it, okay. Yeah. But I mean, a ton, like we know, especially like when it comes to the Achilles and calf, and then obviously from a tendinopathy standpoint and patellar tendinopathy standpoint, excuse me, both like Craig, our athletic trainer, and I try to incorporate, whatever prehab, whatever terminology, right? Like we try to integrate it as in much of our training as possible. And so if we've got kids that have specific, nagging stuff going on, we do a ton of that.
That's awesome. I love to hear that you're obviously so open and so like pulling stuff from these academic institutions and applying them in the real world. I think that's so much of the strength and novelty that you bring to your population and then to all those that you're educating. So I totally appreciate that. Tell this audience of billions of sports PTs listening to you how they can keep learning from you and follow your trajectory.
Yeah, I would say Instagram is probably the most popular form of social media for me. I really try to post a lot of content, more so on my stories. I actually just created another Instagram for just like basketball training. But yeah,
what is that? Come on, give us specifics.
Yeah. So I started my own business back in the fall as well too. I have my own LLC and I train clients in person, but I also do online training programs through Train Heroic, and kind of a branch of that is this Healthy Hooper that I created a social media for in hopes of providing more basketball specific content, training concepts and things like that. But for me personally, my Instagram, mbinetti22, that's my most active source of social media. I do use Twitter or X, or I'm still getting used to calling it X.
Yeah.
But Instagram is kind of the way to go if you're looking to get in contact with me or just kind of follow along with the things that we're doing. I tried to post on there as much as possible.
Awesome. So everyone listening, don't just reach out. It's not about the quantity of connections. It's about the quality of connections. That's what I learned from Molly Binetti today. So reach out to her, develop a relationship, and make sure you're bringing something to the table when you do it. You're not just taking, but you're also giving. So life lessons from Molly Binetti. I really appreciate you joining us. You have been awesome. Thanks to everyone for listening. Let us know how we did. Let us know what I screwed up. Let us know what Molly screwed up. But also let us know what we did really well. We'd love to hear from you. Find us on True Sports PT on Instagram. We can't wait to hear from you. Bye-bye.